Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover how hypertrophy training can be periodized for long-term muscle growth. First and foremost, let's cover what the concept of periodization is. In the classic sense, periodization refers to organizing training from a long-term point of view with the goal of peaking an athlete for a specific time of the year. So coaches would plan training to have their athletes perform at their absolute best for an important competition. So the entire training plan is aimed at peaking the athlete for this one point in time from a performance standpoint. However, this theoretical periodization concept doesn't really apply to hypertrophy training because the outcome we want to achieve isn't a performance goal, it is a structural adaptation. Therefore, when we talk about periodization for hypertrophy training, we are talking about a slightly different concept. The goal with long-term hypertrophy training is to continue growing muscle mass over time. We know that significant muscle growth takes a long time to occur, and we therefore need to train consistently for a long time to achieve this outcome. So we can think of periodization for hypertrophy training as simply long-term management of training to maximize muscle growth. This means we aren't trying to specifically peak for any performance outcomes, we are simply changing whatever variables are required to continue seeing muscle growth over time. With this in mind, it is probably best to manipulate variables in a reactive sense rather than a proactive sense. This means that we don't need to come up with a long-term training plan, we just need to adjust training after each mesocycle based on how the trainee responded to the previous mesocycle. This will allow the trainee to make informed decisions about what variables may need to be adjusted based on the performance and subjective feeling of how the previous training plan felt. There are a few considerations that will inform the trainee on what adjustments to make. The first factor to consider is performance. Lifting performance can be a good general indicator of muscle growth. If we are seeing performance improvements in the 6 to 20 rep range over time, then the program is probably working well and we are probably slowly growing muscle mass. If performance is stagnant or declining over time, then this may be an indicator that the program might need some adjustments. It should also be noted that most trainees will need to look at performance over multiple mesocycles in a row rather than a single mesocycle, because it can take months to see performance improvements. So trainees should look at how their performance is generally trending over months in a row, rather than comparing two individual data points. So if performance is slightly decreased in one session compared to last week, then this doesn't mean the entire program needs to be changed. However, if this is a consistent trend over multiple weeks, then we may need to look at the program and manipulate some variables. The second factor to consider is systemic fatigue. This is a very vague and subjective term, but it can give us some good general information to make decisions from. Systemic fatigue basically refers to fatigue of the entire body that is non-specific to any single training modality. So systemic fatigue impacts lifting performance, performance of other exercise and sports, mental performance, and the immune system. This is not a very well-defined phenomenon, but essentially if we have too much stress at any given point in time, then we will probably feel some of the effects of increased systemic fatigue. This would be perceived as poor lifting performance, lethargy throughout the day, reduced sleep quality, and an increased risk of illness. This can occur with very high training volumes in conjunction with high levels of stress outside the gym. If trainees are feeling some of the symptoms of excessive systemic fatigue, then they may need to make some adjustments to their training program or to other variables outside the gym to ensure they aren't breaching their systemic recovery capacity. Another factor to consider is joint pain. There can be two forms of joint pain that we are concerned with. First is acute pain. This refers to short-term pain or discomfort that is a one-off occurrence and goes away quickly. This may be only when you perform a specific exercise or an acute injury that heals in a few days. And the second form of joint pain is chronic aches. This refers to pain that gradually develops over time and lingers around for a long period of time. This is usually a result of training with too much volume or using heavy loads on certain joints. Either form of joint discomfort or pain may have implications for how your training is manipulated over time. And the last factor to consider is subjective monotony. This refers to boredom of performing the same training over and over again. While monotony and discipline is somewhat necessary to achieve long-term hypertrophy gains, it is also important for trainees to enjoy training to ensure long-term adherence. So if trainees have been performing the same exercises in the same rep range with the same training split, then they may benefit from changing some variables simply to provide a new training routine and keep them engaged. Now that we've covered the factors which inform our periodization decisions, what are the variables we can manipulate based on this information? Let's now cover the general principles of how training may be periodized over time. The first strategy we can implement is to actually maintain all variables. If performance is trending in the right direction, your joints feel healthy, and you aren't experiencing any symptoms of excessive systemic fatigue, then the trainee doesn't have to change anything. They can just continue performing the same program and continue seeing performance improvements over time. For example, let's say a trainee saw good progress from this training program that were created in the previous videos. They can simply repeat the same program and should continue to see progress again. However, if there was some issues with the training program, one factor we can manipulate is volume. This refers to changing the number of sets performed per muscle group per week. Volume could either be increased or decreased based on the response of the trainee to the training program. There are two primary reasons that volume would be increased. The first is if performance was not improving over time for a particular muscle group and the trainee feels systemically fine and the joints involved with that muscle group are not experiencing any pain or discomfort. The trainee may then want to increase volume to get more stimulus to that particular muscle group and see improvements in lifting performance. The other reason would be if the trainee is seeing performance improvements over time, they feel systemically fine, and their joints are not experiencing any pain. The trainee may want to see more muscle growth for that particular muscle group, so they may increase the volume slightly in the next mesocycle. For example, if we take the chest exercises for this training program, we can see here that we have 12 total weekly sets. This trainee may want to increase the volume to 14 weekly sets in the next mesocycle and see how they respond to the program. There are also two primary reasons that a trainee may want to reduce volume for a particular muscle group. First is if systemic fatigue is excessively high and total weekly volume needs to be lowered. Reducing the volume of the program will limit the total weekly workload and allow the trainee to dissipate the total systemic stress on the body. Second is if the trainee is experiencing joint pain in a particular region. They may be performing too much volume for that particular joint to handle and need to reduce the total stress for that specific joint. For example, let's take the chest training volume for this program again. If 14 sets was too much volume for this trainee, they may want to reduce it back down to 12 weekly sets. And the last variable that we can manipulate to periodize our hypertrophy training program is exercise selection. Eventually, every single exercise becomes somewhat monotonous from both a mental and physical standpoint. Changing the exercise can provide a new stimulus for the body to adapt to and also makes training more engaging. However, we don't want to change exercises too frequently as the muscle group needs time to adapt to each new movement. Compound lifts should be kept in the program for at least 3 mesocycles, while isolation lifts can be changed every 1 to 2 mesocycles if desired. However, we ideally want to keep each exercise in for as long as possible until one of 3 things occurs. First is a performance plateau. Eventually, the rate of progress for each exercise will slow down. While this doesn't mean that you are no longer growing muscle, it means the body has become efficient at the lift and the rate of progress is much slower. After a while, it becomes difficult to see further progress in performance, and we may want to introduce a new exercise so the body can adapt to a new stimulus. Second is mental monotony. Performing the same exercises for a long period of time can be somewhat boring, and changing to a new exercise may make training more enjoyable. In this case, the exercise can be changed and you may find that you put more energy into training. And the third reason is if the exercise causes you joint pain. Everyone has slightly different anatomical structures, and some exercises just don't suit their anatomy. Because hypertrophy can be achieved with a large variety of exercises, trainees should avoid those which cause pain. As an example, let's use the incline bench press from the program we previously created. If the trainee experiences one of the previous 3 points, they can change the exercise to a similar exercise training the same muscle groups. For example, they may switch this incline barbell press to a flat dumbbell press. This will still train the same muscle groups, but the exercise is a slightly different variation. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.